Okay, Angie, when you're ready, we're ready for a roll call.
Perfect. Chair Glines,
Present?
committee members Wolf, Hintermeister,
Here.
Hutchison, here, Lovelace, Grunbaum, here, Kesh, here, Brown.
Okay, so the report of the chair, I have no report, so moving on to the next. For the Public Advisory Committee members, do any of you have anything that you want to say for the good of us all? Jan? Julie? Okay. Rachel?
I introduced myself last time, but I don't know, Jake, if you...
Okay, and we have Jake. So if you could tell us the who, what, why, and when, and anything else that you think that will help us pigeonhole you.
Oh, great. Perfect. Hi, my name's Jake Grunbaum. Y would be, I guess, my boss, or the was previously on this committee. I think you know him as Dick Oliver. And
Does he go by other names that we should know?
the boss, I say boss every morning. No, but he got me interested in what this agency does, and you know, getting to meet people that are interested in this. And as I told Ed when we were talking about this, I do work for in-house as an attorney for a real estate developer and home builder, but I've always been very interested in you know, outdoors and the environment, and especially fishing is one of my favorite hobbies. So there's some tension between development and, you know, conservation of open space, but I think the two can get along. So happy to be here. More about me, I guess. I grew up in Morgan Hill, and I was here for most of my life until I went away for school, and then actually moved back in the last 3 years with my wife and our new baby boy, who's now 6 months.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's been an adventure so far. And that's about it.
Rachel, do you have anything that a month into it that you'd like to share or say?
It's been exciting so far, and looking forward to hearing more about these.
Thank you.
I just have one question, and it probably could wait for the ED's report, but I was wondering, are you going to be covering the House bill on wildlife corridors, the Wildlife Corridor Act?
Is that the,
That's Senator Udall?
oh, no, that's new to me. Thank you,
All right,
thank you.
we'll talk.
Yes.
I'll send.
Yes, I was thinking, you know, like Asha's bill, I go, Asha.
No,
Yeah, yeah.
it's,
So, but you said
it's
House.
set to be
Yeah.
introduced in the House and Senate apparently very soon. So it'll be the
Okay.
Wildlife Corridors Conservation Act of 2019. But apparently it's substantively the same as last year's version.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Ken, did you have anything? No. Okay, and just want to also give a chance to for Angie to talk about the new addition to her family at home. And we missed her just a little bit, but she's now back at work, and I saw her at City Hall 2 days ago.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a 4-month-old little girl named Zoe.
Congratulations to you too.
Thank
Right.
you.
Okay, so we're going to start the meeting with public comments for items that are not on the agenda. Doug, you're here? No? Okay. Anyone else? Okay, so on the agenda, item number 1, if I could have a motion and a second to approve the minutes.
Just as a point of clarity, I've provided my minor corrections to Angie already.
Okay?
And I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, and the
Based on
changes
those,
or
they were very, very minor.
okay.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, no noes, no abstentions. The motion passes unanimously. The Water District presentation about the proposed Pacheco Dam. And so if we could hear the report and move forward. And we do have an agenda item chock full of information as well, and a PowerPoint.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Christopher Hakes. I'm the Deputy Operating Officer for the Santa Clara Valley Water District Dam Safety and Capital Delivery Division. Within the division falls the Pacheco Reservoir Expansion Project. So I'm happy to be here today to give you an overview of where we're going with the project. We're very excited. I'll get into some of the details as we go, but we did receive a substantial grant from the California Water Commission in the WISIP funding Prop 1 grant to the order of $484.55 million, which was our actual ask, 100% ask under the program. We were the only recipient to get 100% of our ask, so we think that the Water Commission as well as the district really sees the benefit of the project. So, moving forward. Project location, basically we've got our project partners first. This is a general map that shows that currently it's a partnership agreement between the Santa Clara Valley Water District, we're going by Valley Water these days with a refreshed logo, the Pacheco Pass Water District, and the San Benito County Water District. So they're the three project partners. A little zoom in on the location. Basically the reservoir itself is located about 17 miles northeast of the city of Gilroy and 1 mile north of State Route 152. Let's see if I can get the pointer to work. Oops, the laser pointer. There we go. So basically, this is the existing reservoir right now. It kind of goes back on the creek. You see the north fork of Pacheco Creek and the east fork of Pacheco Creek. The existing dam is right back here. And then we've got our Pacheco Tunnel. And then you see San Luis Reservoir, which is obviously the large reservoir that's out there. The existing facilities, so as I was saying, basically you have the existing dam which backs up onto the creek. You've got our existing Pacheco conduit. There's 152 as you see. We do not have a connection between the existing reservoir and our Pacheco conduit currently. That will be part of the expansion of the project. The existing reservoir is about 6,000 acre feet. They currently impound, I think, only about 5,500 acre feet a year. Their water right does extend to 7,200 acre feet. It's about a 100-foot tall earthen embankment dam with a concrete spillway. We've got some pictures in the upcoming slides. So here's the existing dam, earthen embankment. You got your dam crest. Like I said, about 100 feet tall. You've obviously got the inside of the reservoir here, so you're not sealing the 100-foot side. The existing spillway, as you can see, there was a spillway failure up here in this area. The Department of Safety of Dams, under DWR, has given a repair order to the Pacheco Pass Water District, so they're currently working on getting a fix in place prior to the expansion of the reservoir. So that's something that they're currently dealing with. The proposed facilities, so we're going from 6,000 to up to 140,000. That will depend on the ultimate location of the dam. If for any reason the proposed location is unsuitable and we have to move up north on the creek, the reservoir will be smaller. But right now we're doing the initial investigations. We think 140 is about the size it'll end up being. As you can see here, it says tunnel. Then we have a pump station, another conveyance pipeline and tunnel. It's all the same pipeline. Basically, it's just above ground versus underground. Underground, it's a tunnel. Above ground, it's a pipeline. Go ahead.
Sorry, may I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you if you didn't want me to. I see proposed dam footprint in the existing reservoir. So will the dam be, the actual new dam be in the same place?
It's actually not in the same location. Let's go back a couple slides. The existing dam footprint is actually a little bit more southerly. So
I know but the actual embankment.
yeah, the new dam will not be over top of the old dam. The
Okay.
old dam will actually still be there.
Okay.
It's still up for debate whether we will create passage through the existing dam or we'll completely demolish it and make
Okay.
it go away. So in one of the sections that's going to be shown later, there is a temporary coffer dam that's as part of the reservoir expansion. We may utilize the existing dam as a temporary coffer dam in some configuration, but basically on our slide here, the existing dam would be back up further here.
And remind me the use of the coffer dam.
It's just for water diversions during construction to make sure that we don't inundate the area below while we're basically breaching the existing dam. So we do have some bypass flows. We'll be changing the area topography from taking borrow sites, import. So we just want to make sure that we have a good conveyance system in place to hold any water that may come down during the wintertime and then divert it during the summertime when we're actually doing construction.
And out of curiosity, the existing dam right now, would it need a seismic retrofit? Should it actually, if you guys weren't going there?
So I'm not sure if DSOD has done a seismic analysis of the dam. I think most of the deficiencies have been found in the spillway itself.
Okay.
I'm not sure that they've actually mandated a seismic analysis. I can double check, definitely. It's kind of a moot point at this
More
point.
about, yeah, no,
obviously.
exactly. It's just a
Yeah.
question of curiosity.
Yeah. So we do have a new pump station that we'll be building, the conveyance pipeline and tunnel connecting to our existing Pacheco conduit. The connection to the conduit will allow us either to draw water from our San Luis Reservoir stores into Pacheco Reservoir, the expanded reservoir, or take water from the reservoir, pump it back into San Luis, or alternatively, take water from the reservoir, put it into the Pacheco conduit, which goes to our Santa Clara conduit tunnel, and then back through into the valley, into like Anderson, Calero, some of our other places of use.
I'm sorry, I'm a little tired tonight, so
No worries.
I'm making sure I'm processing this correctly. So you haven't made a decision how you're going to divert it?
So basically, the current appurtenances that are designed will be bidirectional. So in theory, what will happen is on years that we have additional flows that are not going to be utilized in county, instead of quote-unquote wasting the water, we'll actually bring it to the reservoir, and it'll basically commingle with some of the existing watershed flows. And then ultimately, it's intended for those flows to go back into the county in an emergency. So basically, the use for the facility is actually, from the Santa Clara Valley Water District's perspective, is an emergency use facility. There are releases throughout the year for fish benefit, but for the actual everyday operation of the facility, the district does not intend to use it as a ordinary operating facility. This is not like Anderson Dam, where we're controlling the flows that are coming in and out, diverting to our treatment plants to serve the population. This dam is actually this reservoir is actually emergency supply. So basically, in times of drought, critically dry years, we would have a yield of somewhere between 80 and 130,000 acre feet available, which is enough for about 1 million people, give or take. It really depends on the conservation measures that are in place. That's 1 million people for a year. Depends on how long your drought's going, how much water people are using. That could stretch a little bit further out. The population could be a little bit bigger, and that serves both San Benito and Santa Clara counties. But in general, we don't forecast where we will be
1 million in San Benito or Santa Clara County? I mean,
combined, 1 million in San Benito and Santa Clara, because San Benito is our project partner right now.
okay, yeah.
They're looking at their participation level somewhere between 2.5% and 10%.
Okay.
So based on that, they'll have an allocation in the reservoir, which they'll be able to draw out in critically dry years.
But San Benito has a very small population.
Correct.
Isn't it like 56,000 or something?
It could be. I don't have the
Yeah,
population,
yeah, I think
current
it-
population numbers on them.
Okay, all right.
So to your question about, and it may have been, the trigger may have been, would we be pumping water back into San Luis Reservoir? Not in the typical operation. Basically, there are some scenarios which we'd be considering that if we had a very wet year with a surplus of water that was stored in the reservoir, if for any reason, we needed to bolster the supply in San Luis, so perhaps we had a series of dry years, kind of like 2017 when we came out of the extended drought that we had. Basically, you're filling up all your supplies, but if San Luis wasn't full and we had enough capacity that Pacheco was, rather than wasting that water, we would then pump it back to San Luis to restore that to full capacity.
Okay, so San Luis is in Merced County,
Sure.
all right. How is that tracked? Because there's got to be some sort of, hey, you got X amount from us, now we need X amount back because we're in a tight spot.
Correct. So San Luis is a store for both the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. So all of the water in there actually has an accounting mechanism. So each of the participants that participates in San Luis as either State or Central Valley side has an allocation of water that's stored in San Luis and can be drawn upon. So if we were to send
Regardless of what happens in those allocations those years when we go through drought years.
Correct. So basically, if your water is in there already, you can get it out. Now, there are some caveats to that, and actually this a little bit later in the presentation will address one of those situations where it's a little bit more difficult to draw the water out.
Okay.
But the, difficulty in San Luis is if it's full, you have very limited carryover capacity.
Okay.
Basically, you can carry over water year from year if there's enough sufficient capacity, but then if a heavy rain comes in, fills up San Luis to its allocation amount, you lose whatever water is, if they lose water, you lose the water. There's no carryover, so it's not rollover.
Okay, yeah, so there's no guarantee. Okay, thank you.
Okay?
Quick question. So the new dam will be above the existing dam, is that correct? Correct. Okay.
So existing Pacheco conduit, 140,000 acre feet. It's about 320 feet tall, 319 feet, but there will be a new concrete spillway, new earthen dam. The tunnel's about 1 mile long, the pump station and the inlet outlet structure. I asked them to give me a rendering of the new facility. They forgot to put the trees and wildlife on there, so it looks rather odd. You've got a blue crater with a dam in front of it.
We're talking to the engineers or something?
Yes. So they were a little too literal in my
Deep
direction.
Sea ocean trench.
Yeah. So we'll update that slide for future to make it a little more in context. They did, of course, they're engineers, so they were able to provide a cross-section very easily. And this is just a typical cross-section. We're obviously not far enough in our design to have the specific details, but this is what you expect to see in the dam. Basically, you got earth fill, impervious clay core. They have a blow-up here down so you can see the free draining coarse material so that you can get to your gravel drain and your blankets. This is where your coffer dam is, at least through construction, to kind of handle the dead pool flows that are there. So in theory, the geometry may not work exactly correctly, but the existing dam would be about in that area if we're looking to use it as a coffer dam. If the final location of the dam moves a little bit, that may not be the case. If we find the area where the dam is supposed to be situated is too southerly and needs to move north, then we might actually impact the existing dam and need to remove it as part of construction. Those details are all to be worked out still.
Why clay?
Clay is an impervious material. It's, in general, your two options for dams these days are earth embankment or concrete. That's a massive amount of concrete to put in. It's not very
Yes.
environmentally friendly, so
Yes.
we go with the earthen dam. The impervious clay core is the standard construction for dams. It's basically very resilient. It doesn't expand to the degree of normal soil with water capabilities. It's just kind of the way it's best done. I don't have a very scientific explanation beyond
All right.
that.
Okay, thank you.
These are the project benefits. We'll go into the successive slides. We'll have more details about each of the benefits. There are five main areas, though. You've got enhancement of the habitat for federally threatened South Central Coast steelhead. Basically, water supply. This is basically, we're talking about emergency water supply. Increase of reliability. We'll kind of go into depth on how that works. Water quality issues in St. Louis. So basically, that's, can you get your water out? Really, what does it mean? We'll talk about that as well. And then it also has some incidental flood reduction benefits to the communities downstream of Pacheco Creek, which are underserved communities right now. So steelhead, what are we doing for steelhead? The benefits in the Prop 1 grant application are there's a large benefit to the steelhead population. Right now, because it's only 6,000 acre feet, the creek tends to dry back in summer, where basically there are no flows at all for a large portion of the year. No flows obviously makes it difficult for fish to spawn, rear, and travel. Through this, we're looking to increase the amount of water that's available to the fish throughout the year, and the creek may still get dry in some of the hottest parts of summer, but the intent is to provide good flows throughout the year. A large, deep, cold water pool behind the new reservoir, somewhere to the tune of between 20 and 50,000 acre feet. So there should be a large pool to always draw cold water supply down Pacheco Creek. We also have some ecosystem benefits, obviously, that will be that go along with the federally threatened fish recovery. So we have our large cold water pool, the South Central Coast steelhead, and then population growth for the surrounding riparian area along Pacheco Creek. Bay Delta ecosystem. So the thought here is the less we draw on the Delta, the better it is for their ecosystem. So as part of the Pacheco Reservoir Expansion Project, the thought is we have an independent source of water in times of heavy need and a heavy draw on the Delta. In times of drought, the allocations that come from the Central Valley Project as well as the State Water Project are curtailed pretty severely. You have everybody drawing on a very limited pool at the same time. So this provides a different source to be drawn on in critically dry years. That lack of demand from the district on the delta obviously means there's additional supply for other parties or additional supply that can just remain there for nature. Enhanced water supply for agriculture and M&I. Once again, this is drought risk. As you mentioned, San Benito, or as I mentioned and you said, San Benito County is our project partner. They do have more of an agricultural base than we do, but obviously for use in the county, it's prioritized in times of drought for M&I first. But if there were a scenario in which we were able to draw in a dry year, ultimately this could support both agriculture and M&I. Emergency water supply. So this is a delta levee failure on the Jones Track. I'm sure you guys have heard all about how the delta is in a bad way in terms of the infrastructure that's up there, that a earthquake, and I would love to say major earthquake, but it just sounds these days like an earthquake of significant size would severely curtail some of the supplies that would come through. Once again, this is a reliance issue. If there were an event there that would curtail the deliveries through the State Water Project and Central Valley Project, Pacheco would be our source for at least temporary supply as they fixed whatever levee breaches or failures they had up there. The Cal Water Fix is an independent action. It's not required to basically get benefit from the Pacheco Reservoir Expansion Project, but if it did move forward in the single tunnel configuration in which it is now, that's just another source of supply that's a little more stable. That's not saying there couldn't be additional levee failures in the future that Pacheco wouldn't help mitigate against. So basically, we are very interested in the local supply that's basically just at the edge of our county, right? The closer it is to the county, the more reliable supply source it is for us during times of seismic failure, extreme drought, anything like that. San Luis Reservoir. So if San Luis Reservoir gets down to about 300,000 acre feet, you have a very shallow pool of water that heats up very quickly. We get algal blooms throughout the reservoir, and we have what we call a low point issue. So the water that we draw out of the San Luis Reservoir when we have a low point issue is very hard to treat. We get a high degree of hair algae. Towards 2016, just to give you an empirical kind of situation we ran into, at our Rinconada water treatment plant, typically we do water treatment using alum, basically as our coagulant. Our primary coagulant produces a certain amount of sludge which we press out. When we have taste and odor issues, we use powder activated carbon to kind of remove those, which also produces a little more sludge. And in the worst case scenario, what we do is we use ferric chloride as our coagulant, which is it's way more effective at basically coagulating some pretty bad water quality, but it produces a lot of sludge. So what we experienced in 2016 was some very poor water quality coming out of San Luis Reservoir, hair algae all over the place, clogging up our filters, and we had to switch to ferric and PAC, which we haven't done in, I can't speak for the entirety of the almost 100 years of the district, but nowhere on record could we find the need to actually pump ferric and PAC at the same time. It was sending our sludge production through the roof. That's the worst case scenario, and Pacheco would basically mitigate against that scenario. We wouldn't need to draw from San Luis. We'd have emergency supply in the Pacheco Reservoir. That water would be a deep, cold water pool. No algal blooms, no hair algae issues. Theoretically, it's just better water to be available in times of need.
But it would only be, if I understood you correctly, the dam supply would only be for 1 year for about 1 million people.
About 1 million people for a year. Like I said, the county is very good at conservation. So right now, I think we're still conserving at a rate as compared to 2013, which is our last quote-unquote normal year before our drought, in the 18 to 22% range. But during the extended drought, we were up over 30 to 35%. So you would figure with a call for conservation, kind of some of the measures that are in place that could potentially either go to a larger population for a longer amount of time. Obviously, it's not the silver bullet to get us through every issue moving forward. A prolonged drought's a prolonged drought. It creates issues all over the place. But ultimately, between our groundwater management, the supply that would be already there in Pacheco, perhaps any additional local supplies in Anderson and Calero, we would look to meet the needs of residents as long as we can. The other benefit of the project is it does produce, and this is what DWR will tell you, any construction of a dam facility does have inherent flood risk reduction benefits. They are incidental benefits. They're not the main driver, but there is a disadvantaged community down on Pajaro Creek, and basically they flood quite regularly. This is a picture from January 11th and February 10th, kind of where you see the localized flooding. But I believe the reoccurrence of flooding in the area is every 3 to 5 years. So the construction of the reservoir will help to address that. It'll attenuate flows coming through the system. We'll be better able to regulate the flows that are coming out for fish, but also the flows due to heavy rains.
In the last 2 floodings,
Yes.
how many residential homes and were evacuated, damaged, and most of it is just open fields that were flooded.
There are some, the majority of the land itself is open fields. You do have some of the community that is basically farm workers, so I don't have a number on the population that was affected. I could get that for a future, what the impact was on any given kind of flooding event. But yeah, you know, generally speaking, when we deal, let's say, with the Army Corps' benefit analysis, a disadvantaged community that is mostly dependent upon agriculture, the cost-benefit ratio doesn't work out, because what the Army Corps will tell you is it's cheaper to pay insurance and just basically rebuild than it is to protect. I think that puts a unfair spotlight on the economics of hardship. You know, it's easy on paper to say, hey, it's cheaper just to tear everything down and rebuild. But
You don't live there.
Right, this is someone's life, right? So, you know, from the district's perspective, or excuse me, from Valley Water's perspective, it's not about the, you know, thousands of people that were affected. It could be 100, it could be 50, but it's a quality of life issue that we're looking to help solve. This is an incidental benefit from the construction of the reservoir. It's kind of like a happy, I don't want to say happy coincidence, it's a serendipitous occurrence of promoting steelhead population recovery, emergency water supply. This is one of the benefits that's just like a cherry on top. Schedule. This is where we are on our project schedule. In October 2017, we were granted the $485 million approximately from the California Water Commission. In July of 18, we actually got the conditional approval along with $24.2 million in early funding. In August 2017 is when we submitted the application. July 2018 is when we actually received the award. We executed planning and design agreements with our consultants. We have 2 consultants on the project, a planning, design, and environmental consultant, as well as a program manager. That was executed in November of 2018. Right now, we're shooting for our draft EIR for public release in January of 2022. That's directly tied to our WISUP award. And then we'll finalize our plans and specifications in 2024, provided that we get through the environmental and permitting process, and then basically award construction in November of that year. Theoretically, at this point, you're looking at a 4 to 5 year construction period, so kind of off the end of the table, you're looking for project completion somewhere around 28, 29. And I think that's the last slide. Yep.
What's the total cost of the project right now estimated at?
So it depends on the dollar. If you would like the dollars in 2015 dollars as it was in the WISUP application, it's $987 million approximately, almost 990. If you're going to escalate the cost through the termination of construction in 2028, that goes up to about $1.35 billion. So it's kind of interesting when you talk project costs. Where do you want to see the number? If it's all the way at the end, if it's how it was originally proposed, you know, we could try to translate to 2019 dollars or 2020 dollars. It just depends on what you're looking at any given time.
Yeah, okay, thank you. You've given me the right, you know, you've given me a range.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, I have 2 questions, and then Doug has a comment. Okay. Is the private landowner a willing seller?
So there are actually 7 individual private landowners that we're currently working with. They have not indicated that they are unwilling. I know that's not exactly the best way to say it, but we don't have an agreement in place right now for a purchase, and ultimately a purchase may not be necessary. It may be the granting of an easement. The district, Valley Water, is currently in discussions with all the property owners on what that eventuality will look like. There are mechanisms in place to ensure that the district is able to protect its interests moving forward, but we prefer the negotiated route.
Okay. And what was the extent of Indian life in settlement there?
So we do have, as part of the project, AB 52 consultation with the Native American tribes. We've gone to the, oh, and I always get the acronym wrong. There's the state, I believe, well, the SHPO is a permitting agency for it, but there's actually a Native American.
NAHP.
Yeah, basically it's the state agency that keeps track of all of the Native American interests in any given area. We've contacted them. They've indicated there's a list of potentially 10 tribes for the in total impact of the project, basically upstream, downstream, not just the reservoir itself. We're going through the consultation process as we speak. So to determine what the overall impact will be is still TBD. But that is something that is obviously high on the list. As Edmund mentioned, the State Historic Preservation Officer will be involved in permitting the project. So we will go through all of the necessary consultations and make sure that we mitigate or avoid as best as possible any impacts to the Native American artifacts or existing cultural resources in the area.
And Doug, does anyone, any board members?
Yeah, so you're doing an EIR, so this is not one of the approved projects under the Habitat Plan. So what exactly is the Habitat Agency's interest or connection with this project?
Yeah, currently, no. I guess our main interest would be if they are, how they would mitigate for project impacts within the plan area. And given we have a good relationship with the Valley Water, got it. And it would just be coordinating with them where they did their appropriate mitigation to ensure it's not conflicting with our conservation objectives. If the district chose to say, hey, we want the habitat plan to cover this project, we'd have to amend the plan. And we'd have to determine what the take would be, and we'd have to kind of analyze the impacts. And amending the plan takes 3 to 5 years, because we'd have to do an EIR. We'd have to revise our current EIR, yeah.
But as it is, I mean, they're just kind of following the old.
EIR,
or the-
EIS, I should say,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
Kind of basic path.
yeah, but currently, yeah, it's like working with high-speed rail or the RCIS, it's making sure it doesn't conflict with what we're doing.
So, and the other question I had was I guess about the steelhead. So, so I'm not a fish expert, so if I say something stupid, it's okay to laugh, but you can correct me. So, right now, I mean, the current dam already kind of cuts off any spawning that would happen upstream, right? So any benefits you're talking about are just kind of downstream of having a more kind of permanent source of water. So, like in wet years, has there been identified historical spawning, below the dam? I'm just kind of curious whether you know any of that, the history.
So the ESA coverage for the area basically states that there are a population that could be recovered in the area. I don't have any information specifically. I mean, the last wet year we really had was 2017, and I'm not sure if there were sufficient spawning surveys done. As part of the process moving forward, we will be doing surveys hand in hand with NIMS to determine exactly what the recovery targets should be for the population. Generally, we don't talk in numbers of fish, but we talk about the quality of the habitat that's produced. So, the assessment at this point is there is a species to recover in the area.
Okay. Thank you.
And questions regarding just the lessons learned. I think the other most recent dam reconstruction project is the Calaveras Dam. Has the district coordinated at all with them as far as lessons learned? They had a number of significant issues and things that I think would
Correct.
benefit
So
planning effort.
it's interesting you asked, because we are using the Calaveras Dam as the model for the lessons learned to move forward with our Anderson Dam project, which is a seismic retrofit that will actually be scheduled to start about 2 years before this project. So we're actually taking the lessons the Calaveras learned, incorporating the Anderson, running it through the system and seeing what we learn on Anderson, and then incorporating onto Pacheco. So yes, we're trying to basically not repeat the mistakes of the past and kind of streamline the process. This is a tight timeline to get that EIR out. And then while that is one of the timelines, there's always that area after you get your EIR out on the streets when you're moving into the permitting. And I think that is where the potential exists for the project to slow down a bit. So we are using the lessons we've learned on Anderson and Calaveras to kind of speed that process along.
Another corollary question is regarding just costs for construction. With the resources that have been pouring into the Oroville spillway and these other construction projects, you see the articles every day on this being the most expensive area to construct. Is the timing of this project kind of factoring some of that in, trying to stage things where maybe those same resources can be used coming off of that, or is it just full steam ahead, try to get it in?
Basically, the bottom line of construction, especially for a dam of this size, is the longer you wait, the more expensive it gets. So we're doing everything in our power to expedite the process, both through planning, design, and construction. Realistically speaking, the types of resources that are available on Oroville now would probably not be then directly flowed down into Pacheco just because the timing doesn't really work. But we are doing everything in our power to make sure that the cost escalation, as you heard, the range, 2015, this project would have cost $980 million, right? 2028, when it's built, it's actually going to cost $1.35 billion escalated. So we know that the potential for delaying the implementation of the project will increase the project cost significantly. So we're doing everything in our power to make sure that it moves in an expeditious manner.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Doug?
Thank you. Good evening, committee members, staff, and our guest from the Water District. I would like 2 terms on slide 11 defined, Deadpool and Cofferdam. Then I would like to follow up on slide 11 with Mr. Hintermeister's questions about where the fish are, as well as invasive species. And I would like to follow up with Mr. Glein's question and ask about attitude of neighbors. So, Deadpool and Cofferdam I've already asked. Slide 11. The dam blocks 2 forks of the Pacheco Creek. And so I'm wondering, when at the last bullet on the slide that talks about an independent population, whether you're talking about fish above the dam on those forks, or, as Mr. Hintermeister asked, is it below the dam? And then you talked about continuous flows, and I'm not sure if you meant truly continuous flows or that water was available for pulse flows, because there's some debate in the environmental community that pulse flows are better for natives and continuous flows encourage invasives. And then to Mr. Glein's comment about the neighbors, it's been a number of months since I last went to a water storage exploratory committee, but at that time there was some concern. Some people wanted to win hearts and minds and do tours, and there was a hesitation because the committee members weren't sure that the neighbors in the area were all very receptive to that. So if you've talked about the land piece of it, maybe you could talk about their openness to engage. So just a few little questions for you. Thank you.
So just out of curiosity, because at Valley Water we do it a little different, would you like me to respond to Mr. Muirhead's questions?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Great. So let's go into the 2 terms that you had requested be defined, Deadpool and Cofferdam. Cofferdam is a temporary structure that's usually put in place to help dewater construction area. So basically, the Cofferdam helps to control the flow of water during construction periods. It's not actually meant to create a little mini reservoir or anything like that. It's meant to actually help construction by controlling the water flows that are coming in. The dead pool is the water that's behind the cofferdam. They call it a dead pool because generally that is a shallow pool of water that doesn't support a variety of life. It's very, I would say, temporal in nature. If we can pump it out, we will pump it out. It will dry out in summer, but in winter, it does create a temporary pool that's there. Is that good, Doug? Okay.
Although it's also, you can't extract
Correct. Basically, we would expect that it would stay there in winter and dry out in summer just through evaporation and heat. But it just depends on how much water is actually there and how low your intake is. The last question I recall hearing was actually about resident interaction and tours. Right now, we are not widely publicizing the availability of tours, partially because we are still in negotiations with the property owners. That's just something that we feel would complicate the negotiations at this point. If we haven't agreed to long-term site access or acquisition, to ask for the acceptability of a tour in the area is something we don't want to complicate the matters with.
Steelhead question.
Steelhead question, independent population. So basically, yes, we do have two forks of the river that are going to be affected by frankly, the existing dam affects both forks of the river, and this new dam will as well. The population recovery is mainly downstream. It's not intended to, well, I mean, I am not a fish person, so I can't speak to if it will actually increase the upstream population as well, just because you have a larger population downstream that would then be able to migrate upstream through fish passage. I'm going to leave that to some of our environmental staff members, and I'll have to punt a little bit on that question. But the main benefit that I'm aware of is into downstream population. Also along Steelhead, I believe there was another question related to, oh, now I've forgotten it. Pulse flows, yes. So I expect that when I said continuous flow, I did mention also that in the summer months, we'll expect that it will go dry at certain points. Whether the continuous flow is actually a continuous flow or a pulse flow is still to be determined in conjunction with the regulatory agencies in the area or that have jurisdiction, National Marine Fisheries Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as it's going to be the State Water Resources Control Board that ends up issuing the 401 permit for this project for water quality certification, but they will consult with the region, so we would expect that they will all be stakeholders in the process to determine what types of flows we have at what points of the year. Yep. Did I hit them all?
Just thank you for the presentation, and you did represent the Valley Water well with your presentation.
Thank you very much. Happy to come back when we've got more to report.
And take us on a tour.
That's right. Negotiations in like 3 years.
Okay. So we received the report, or received and heard. Item number 3, Santa Clara Valley Habitat Plan FY 17-18 Annual Report. And I think this will also, especially for the new ones, but also for us who've been around a little longer, if you haven't looked at it, you don't have to look at it in depth, but it gives us more than a thumbnail about the activity, and I was impressed.
Thank you. All right, my name is Tara Donovan. I'm the Principal Program Manager at the Habitat Agency, and I'll be presenting the fiscal year 17-18 annual report. So the Habitat Plan is a 50-year program that phases land acquisition with development. And this fiscal year is the 5th year of 50, and it is the 4th annual report. So it represents about 10% of our permit term. And I'll be going through our various compliance elements, including the impacts, conservation, fees received, and kind of an overall status of where we're at. So there we go. So this is what I do every day. I go outside and I move rocks around and I talk to animals. So just in case you're wondering.
Dr. Doolittle.
We do more than that. So this is our annual report top 10. This year we covered our most projects ever, 61 covered projects. We received $12.2 million in funding. We had $2.3 million in expenditures. Of that $12.2 million, $2.1 million came from 3 different grants. We have over 2,700 acres protected or under management. Across our 5 burrowing owl breeding sites, we had 53 burrowing owls and 81 fledged young. For our restoration program, we have 8 projects completed, ongoing, or in planning. We monitored 4 populations and that revealed that they were stable or increasing. And we created a new way to document protected plant compliant or protected plant occurrences, and we've documented 139 plant occurrences protected on a reserve system. And 11 of our 17 resources met the stay-ahead provision, and I'll get a little bit more into each of these today. So covered projects, where were they? So here's a map of the county, and then in the red line is our permit area. And then the red circles on the map are the locations of our covered projects. So we had 29 projects covered by the city of San Jose, 5 by the county of Santa Clara, 4 by the city of Gilroy, and 3 in Morgan Hill. So public projects, these are projects implemented by our co-permittees or our participating special entities. So the Water District implemented 9 projects, or covered 9 projects. City of San Jose, County Parks, and the Habitat Agency each permitted 4 projects, and County Roads permitted 3. So year to year, we have different levels of covered projects. To date, we've covered 226 projects. To give you a comparison, East Contra Costa has been in effect for about twice as long as us, and they've only covered 150 projects. So we are permitting a lot of projects in Santa Clara County. We permitted the most projects ever this year with 61, and that's both private and public projects. Looking at our impacts to date, most of them are in developed and agricultural lands. So 41% of our impacts have occurred in developed areas. So that's looking at developed ag, urban infill, barren landscapes, and then agricultural lands, 38%. And then only 21% of our impacts have occurred in natural lands. And to date, in our 50-year permit term, we've incurred 10% of our permanent impacts and 13% of our temporary impacts. And one of the questions the board had was, where are the agricultural impacts occurring? The thought was that they are occurring in Santa Clara County, and they're not. Those are mostly occurring within the the limits of planning limits of urban growth of San Jose, Morgan Hill, and Gilroy. The county doesn't allow any large subdivisions anymore, and so most of those agricultural lands are within the city boundaries. So again, looking at the covered projects, how are they distributed across the co-permittees? So San Jose has permitted the most with 70, and a lot of these are what we call nitrogen deposition only projects. They're projects that are redeveloping inside the city, that are a new building going in. Maybe it was, for example, a car repair shop there before, and now they're putting in a 20-story apartment building. And so that change in use changes what we call nitrogen deposition from that facility. So most of those projects in San Jose are those types of projects. So San Jose, 70 projects. Santa Clara County's next with 56 projects, followed by the Water District, Morgan Hill, Gilroy, the Habitat Agency. And VTA, they haven't done very many projects, but they have some coming. So one of our biggest projects, or our biggest project this year, was called Arcadia Evergreen, and this is off Capitol Expressway on the east side of San Jose. This project spans, hold on, look at my notes on this one, is about 65 acres. It will result in the construction of over 300,000 square feet of commercial or retail space and 250 single-family homes. So this area, this project paid over $800,000 in land cover fees, $4.5 million in burrowing owl fees. This area was historically supported breeding burrowing owls, and so that it was subject to the burrowing owl fee. It result in both new vehicle trips and residential units, so both of those pay what we call the nitrogen deposition fee, across those two, nearly $100,000 in, actually over $100,000 in nitrogen deposition fees. And this project totaled $4.6 million in fees. So this is one of our largest projects to date. So what does that mean for funding? So year over year, our funding is highly variable. It comes from two sources: fee sources, which are those projects, covered projects, and non-fee sources, which are grants. So over the course of the permit term, we've received $42.9 million in total revenue. In a reporting year, we received the highest amount of fees to date, with $10.1 million in fees and then $2.1 million in funding. So this represents 7% of the expected fee funding and 6% of the expected non-fee funding.
Just as a reminder, the non-fee for fiscal year 2016, yeah, that was Coyote Ridge. Was that why we're, okay.
Yeah, so you'll see, so that jump is because is the purchase of Coyote Ridge. So that wasn't necessarily money that we spent ourselves. That was money spent by OSA and mostly grant-funded grant sources. I'll go into this here, expenditures. So year over year, we have our expenditures are rather low. So you'll see for the first reporting period, which include fiscal year 14 and 15, comparing that to fiscal year 17, 18, we've really had between $2 and $3 million annual expenditures. If we look at fiscal year 16, and expenditures are here in gray, we had both a jump in funding and expenditures, and that was because of the purchase of Coyote Ridge. We expect to see a similar jump the next time we purchase a property, because not only do we spend money, but we get more of the money that's been pledged or secured for grants when we have a land purchase. So the Habitat Plan estimates an average of $9.7 million spent a year, and we're not there yet. Our funding is pretty much is more or less on track there, but our expenditures are not, just because of the difficulty we've had purchasing another property. So you can see here, our total revenue over our permit term is $42.9 million, and then our expenditures are only $18.2. So that tells you we have a lot in reserves. So fee adjustments. Things change prices year to year, and every year we change our fees are increased based on the consumer price index and the housing index. And the land cover fee, serpentine, and nitrogen deposition fee are all use the same metric for increase, and the boring owl and wetland fee use a different metric. I don't know why, but this is the year-to-year changing in fees that we've had since the permit term and it was initiated. This year's different.
I can tell.
Okay.
So burrowing owl and wetlands are like management and restoration, so that reflects more what the CPI would be. So if you're doing a restoration project, that's materials you're using, that's labor you're using, and that reflects more of a pure CPI, where the other one is a hybrid. It's a weighted average of the housing index and the CPI.
And so this year we're actually doing what we call a periodic fee adjustment. So our fees will change differently this year. That's looking at all of our expenditures to date, how much we have left to do, and if our fees are actually in line with accomplishing all of what we set out to do. And so there may be, they'll just be changed differently next year. All right, the conservation strategy. Here's why we do this. We have four areas that we're currently managing. Coyote Ridge, we have 2 burrowing owl breeding sites, one at Don Edwards and one at, the U.S. Wildlife Refuge at Don Edwards, the Warm Springs unit, and then the Regional Wastewater Facility. And then we have the Pacheco Creek Reserve. So across these properties, we have over 2,700 acres protected or under management. We've achieved 5% of our conservation target. We have 139 plant occurrences protected in the reserve system. And then this past year, we monitored 4 plant populations that indicated a stable or increasing population. And then again, at the burrowing owl sites, we had 53 breeding owls and 51 young across 5 breeding sites. And I believe the burrowing owl group has talked to you guys this year. Is that, we have them present every year, so I'm not gonna go into any depth on that, even though it's the most exciting thing we do. So reserve management and monitoring. So we do a lot of different things across our reserves. Across all the reserves, we do vegetation management, and that includes invasive species treatments with herbicides, grazing, and manual and mechanical removal. We have been installing and maintaining infrastructure at all of our reserves. This includes installation of artificial burrows for the burrowing owls. Also, at Coyote Ridge, we've been doing some road work. Boundary surveys were conducted at Coyote Ridge and Pacheco. At Coyote Ridge, we've actually done quite a lot. We did RDM monitoring, a cultural resources inventory, covered plant seed collection and banking, and species monitoring. Species monitoring was also conducted at Don Edwards and the Regional Wastewater Facility as part of the burrowing owl breeding surveys and overwintering surveys. We did natural community monitoring at Coyote Ridge and Pacheco. At Coyote Ridge, that was looking at the serpentine grassland composition, and for Pacheco, it was mapping the natural communities that are there. And we're conducting research across all of our properties. And next, I'd like to highlight some of the research that we've done. This is the 152 Wildlife Connectivity Project that Pathways for Wildlife is doing on our behalf. This project uses camera surveys to identify different crossing structures under Highway 152 to document what animals are using them, and then also doing roadkill surveys. And this is a highlight of some of the animals they've captured.
And 152, Pacheco Pass, yes.
Hold on. I didn't check to see if hold on a second. Let me make sure I've got some volume here. Just give me 1 second. I did not check ahead of time. Actually, you know what? We're just gonna show pictures today. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Thank you. Nope.
On mute.
No, it's just not.
If you can click on that.
Okay.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a silent homage of the pictures. There's a really great
Yeah,
sound
they're-
behind it.
They're not on the screen, right?
No.
Oh, you can't see it at
No,
all.
we can't see anything.
It was at first,
No,
and then it went
no.
black.
Yeah, no, it
All
went
right.
blank, yeah.
Sorry about that. I don't know what I did here. All right.
It was going, though.
All right.
Because, yeah, you could hear it just for a second, really quiet.
A silent film.
That's not showing on the main screen, so I don't know if it's gonna be captured on the video.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That's a good
Okay.
point.
Gotta go with it. Are you seeing it, Doug?
Yeah, I can see the
Okay.
incredible.
Thank you. I think I messed some things up over here. So while you're watching this, I'll tell you about it a little bit. So what they've found, they've seen the most diversity of animals that they've seen using the culverts here on Pacheco. So Pathways for Wildlife does photo monitoring across the county, and they've said that this is the most diverse area of wildlife that they've seen throughout the county. So Pacheco Pass area is very important for wildlife connectivity. We have all sizes of animals, both using the culverts as well as crossing the road, sometimes being hit. Everything up, we haven't had elk down on Pacheco yet. They're further up in, by the San Luis Reservoir. But we've seen almost everything using the culverts, so that's really exciting.
I'm just going to put a placeholder here, and so I don't forget at the end. But if it would be appropriate, because of Pathway for Wildlife, their work in both of our two critical wildlife corridors, Coyote Valley and Pacheco Pass, it would be great if Tanya Nahiga would be willing to come down and make a presentation, because this just does not get across the work they do.
You're preempting my surprise.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
In August.
Really? Yeah. Cool. All right, great. Thank you.
Yeah. And we've been working with a larger wildlife connectivity working group as well. And there's a lot of great work happening in Santa Clara County. We hosted our Santa Clara County working group last month here. So it's really exciting. We have the Pacheco Creek area, or 150 Pacheco Pass area. Also a new study looking at the 101 in the Gavilan Range, so looking between Santa Clara, Santa Cruz, Monterey County, San Benito County in that region, as well as continued work in Coyote Valley.
Yeah, I forget the name of those mountains. It's over where you were telling me where that development's being proposed.
Gavilan,
Bahar-
should be the Gavilan.
GAB.
Yeah.
Yes,
Gavilan.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, not the college.
So next is restoration. So as I said earlier, we have 8 projects completed in planning or ongoing. And this was in last fiscal year, so some of this stuff has changed a little bit. So Calero County Park and Wetland Project is completed, as well as the Pajaro Ranch Hedgerow Project. In 2018, we finished up the Grant County Park San Felipe Creek Project, as well as the Pacheco Creek Riparian Restoration Project. And Rachel was part of the team on the Grant County Park project as well. On Coyote Ridge, we continue to, and we have now moved from pilot into the full phase of the creation of the Coyote Ceanothus new population up there, where I was actually there today. It looks great. They've had some tremendous success, and they're ready to scale up, both doing direct seeding, so putting seeds in the ground, as well as plants. And then we have,
Sorry, Tara, just a question of curiosity. Do I remember correctly, they did a first run at that and it
Everything
failed
died.
miserably?
yes.
Okay, great, thanks.
So this past year, they did 100% remediation of that site. So they used a variety of, so what happened on Coyote Ridge is they had 4 test plots, four test areas where they were planting Coyote Ceanothus. In the first year, they did container plants, and all the plants were contaminated with this waterborne mold called Phytophthora. Plant destroyer is what it means. And all the plants ended up dying, and they did a number of treatments. They did solarization, so they put white panels over the plant basins. They did steam, so that worked everywhere where there was a lot of direct sunlight. In some of the more shaded areas, they had to use a steam auger, where they actually injected hot steam into the ground. And then the ones that were the most difficult to cure, they actually used a solar oven and put soil into the oven and baked it. And they've had 100% remediation at that site now. So it was quite expensive and took a few years, but it worked. So good thing is we failed quickly, and then we learned from our failure. We got to recover quickly. So the other three projects are the Cardi Ridge Open Space Preserve, Stockbound Habitat Restoration will be going into construction this year. The Pacheco Creek Stream and Riparian Restoration Project is currently started planning last year, continues into this year. And the Bolsa Road project led by Santa Clara Valley Water District is in the planning stages. So San Felipe, my baby. So this project is at Grant County Park, and we went out there on a field trip a couple weeks ago. Jan joined us to look at this 50-acre restoration site. It's about a 2-mile hike into the park, or you can drive if you're special. And I just want to show a few of the project elements here on the on this image. So here, oh wait, where can I see the area? It's so tiny. There, okay. So actually, let me just go to the laser pointer. So what we did as part of the project is we raised a road that we raised a road that acted as a stream tributary, and we put in what were called these rock lenses, and so water now passes under the road, and we changed the way the water flowed. The goal of the project was to slow water down. So we see a future climate scenario where we have fewer larger storms. So that means water's coming all at once, faster, and we want to be able to slow that down so it stays on site longer. So all the different treatments we did on the site have that goal of slowing water down, holding it on site longer. So rather than this road acting as a tributary, there's water held on the other side of the road that you're not seeing here, and then it passes through these rock lenses into this new channel, which I call a backwater channel. We have overflow here, overland flow here, and then we have these rock lenses having flow here. And the main stem flows this way, and during a heavy storm, it actually kind of creates an eddy right here. So we have water coming in and kind of just sitting here, and then eventually flowing out. And this is one of the areas where we laid back the bank of the stream to reconnect the floodplain here. And one of the interesting things is this entire area here was all disturbed during the project. Was one of our staging areas, and as you can see, it's already come back and is fully greened up. All these little circles here are where we planted trees. This is our pump house. I think somewhere around here is where one of our workers got bit by a snake yesterday. He's okay.
Rattlesnake?
Rattlesnake. He actually might have been back here more, but it was in the valve box. Anyway, so this is San Felipe. Very exciting. It's 50 acres. Riparian restoration was about an acre and a half. We did both perennial and seasonal wetland restoration, about 4 acres, and then nearly 2 miles of streams. And so this was a very big project. And I'm happy to give, if anyone wants a separate tour, I'm happy to bring people out there anytime. So stay-ahead compliance. So the stay-ahead provision is one of our metrics for looking at how are we doing in terms of our permit. We have, at all times, our conservation has to be ahead of our impacts. And it has to be within a 5%. So for Chaparral, for Chaparral, Pond, Streams, and Western Boreal, we are in compliance for those. We have our conservation is ahead of our impacts. But for grasslands, oak woodlands, riparian forest, and scrub, we're slightly behind. The acreages aren't that big. That means that in a single land acquisition, we can easily become ahead. That may occur with the enrollment of the Clara conservation easement or another new land purchase. So we're really not worried because we really jump up every time we do a land acquisition. For plants, we're doing very well. For most of the plants, we are ahead. Coyote Ridge has a lot of plants preserved. The ones that we are, one behind or not yet tracking compliance for are Coyote ceanothus. We still have 1 more year to get into compliance for that. We're making really good progress with the creation project. And for Most Beautiful Jewel Flower, we impacted 1 occurrence, but we think it's still there. So we're going to go out this year and resurvey the area to see if it's persisted, and that will likely be in the green next year. So I like this graphic because it kind of summarizes everything we've just talked about. So 50-year permit term, 5 years in, we're at 10%. And if we look at the status versus the target, it'll give us the percentage that we're at. So the habitat plan has many targets. And so I use the impacts target, conservation targets, and funding targets to look at how are we doing overall with our plan. So if we look at permanent and temporary impacts, we're about, so if we were saying we're going to have even progress throughout our 50-year permit term, that would put us at 10% for everything. So permanent and temporary impacts are around 10%. One's at 10%, one's at 13%. For conservation, we're low. We haven't acquired a new property, and for existing open space enrollment, we haven't enrolled a property. So once we enroll a new large property and a Clara conservation easement, that also will jump up. We're not worried. I thought for a second, I'm like, why is the fee funding not the same as the impact funding? But then I realized most of our impacts are occurring in agricultural and developed lands. That means they're not paying high fees. They're not paying the higher impact fees from wetlands. They're not paying the higher impact fee from natural lands. That's why the fee funding lags a little bit behind the 10% mark. And non-fee funding is tied to conservation. So we will get more non-fee funding in form of grants once we actually have a land acquisition lined up. So overall, we are doing fantastic. Our program is doing what it's supposed to do. And we don't do it alone. We have lots of help. Our co-permittees are busy permitting projects and providing us with technical assistance. We have a lot of conservation partners that we work with, consultants, and also volunteers. So thank you to all of them. And then I'm opening up for questions. So, is everyone still awake?
Yeah, so I'm assuming because you keep talking about Clara, are we going to get an update in the ED report, or is it just status quo?
Yeah, I can give you a brief update now. There's a new attorney on the case, so to speak, and we've made a lot of progress with this attorney. Valerie and I just reviewed their changes to the template. So the wildlife agencies view changes to the template as kind of sacrosanct. You just don't do it. Yeah, you can change some names to protect the innocent or something like that. So this attorney understands the situation and is a breath of fresh air to the whole process. So a lot of the proposed changes that Parks had recommended have been removed. There's still a couple areas that we'll have to see if the wildlife agencies are okay with the changes. The county moves slowly, but I think Don Rocha understood some of the problems that were occurring, put a new attorney in there, and is as anxious as us to get this done. We've had some meetings with county supervisors, just letting them know that this is a super high priority for us, and so yes. So I'm cautiously optimistic. There are concerns from the county about the easement and how that'll affect park and recreation activities. Even though the plan recognizes that park and recreation activities are allowable uses, there's changes hard sometimes.
Thank you. Yeah.
I have to say, like I talked about before, it was really exciting to see this restoration project up at Grant Ranch. I guess I'd heard this before about, the idea behind some of these restoration projects being to slow water down so it doesn't escape. But it was actually really, really interesting to just see all the different ways and mechanisms that were used to make that happen in kind of a large site as we just kind of walked through the whole area. So it was really a fantastic trip to get that demonstration. I just had a couple questions. I just wanted to follow up on something, Tara, that you mentioned right at the end, and that was that our conservation, or that our non-fee funding, grant funding, really will tend to follow acquisitions. So, like, you don't see any reduction in grant programs at the various government levels, that the money's going to continue to be there as we acquire new land and then apply for funding.
I think the funding's different.
Yeah.
So, for example, Section 6 funding used to come out every year. They skipped a year. But now there's no cap, but there's the same amount of money. They didn't put double the money because they didn't. The state has a lot of new programs coming up. And the reason I say we don't get the money until we get the project, for example, the Wildlife Conservation Board matches some of the grants that we go after, and so that money doesn't become real until we have a property. And then, for example, the Moore Foundation, who we may ask for money from, we have to have a property in hand before we get that money. So there's different kind of ways money comes to us. There's getting a grant and kind of baking the money for later, and then you have a property in hand, and then you can get the funding for it. So that's what I say. We'll get some of that fee funding as we get a property.
So pretty bullish on the availability of
No.
grant funding.
Tara.
I'm very optimistic.
No. I can say, and I'll talk to you more about it in the EO report, that if Prop 68 hadn't passed, there would be no money for NCCPs. And so we live, whether this is a good thing or not, whether it comes out of general revenues or it comes out of bonds, people have different opinions on these things. But without this either being included in a governor's budget or the voters passing a bond, our funding is precarious from the state. The feds, it's even more precarious, and I'll talk about more of that in the EO report.
Well, I'll wait to hear that. I mean, because that was just one of the promises. Not that you personally promised.
I did.
Well, you might have, but that was the promise of the HCP.
Yes, correct.
There would just be a conduit for funding.
Correct.
So.
Yes. And Tara's spot on. So we've been awarded a pretty substantial amount of money, and we're applying for a pretty substantial amount of money, which I'll talk about in the EO report. But until we acquire the property, that money isn't released. Right. It isn't money that can go towards anything until we actually acquire the property. And most of the money has a time on when it needs to be spent. So it'll go back to the agency that granted it if we don't buy a property, a specific property or a suite of properties within a scheduled time limit. WCB is a little different. They don't do that. But yeah.
And I had one other question. It had to do with the Burrow Novel. And I was actually just kind of, when I first looked at this report, I figured we would be behind on the stay-ahead provisions. However, it looks like we're ahead. But then when I kind of looked at some of the details, I mean, we're ahead because we have some 5-year management agreements on about 1,000 acres. So, I mean, when we have 5-year agreements, I mean, do we expect that the political realities are going to be such that those just are going to continue in perpetuity, or do you think those are potentially in jeopardy as we try to look at?
Yeah, no, I don't hang my hat on those. Yeah, we've had some good discussions with the city about putting a conservation easement over the entire buffer lands area. And we also talked about extending the management of the areas that they've identified for economic development. They have some different views, nuanced views on this. I can't get into it. I have to respect their opinion on it, but no, I do not view those. And we're struggling with turning around the burrowing owl population out at Warm Springs. Yeah, so far I would not say it's a success.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's really interesting because, you know, I mean, when we started the HCP, again, it was about acquisition and restoration. Mm-hmm. And all those things are kind of like, you know, you march forward. Mm-hmm. But this does seem to be an area where it would be possible to kind of fall back.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
It's why we're in the Tier 3 area with the burrowing owls. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And for the new members, the Tier 3 is kind of like DEFCON 5 for the burrowing owls. There's a chance they could be extirpated from the plan area. So.
My question, you referred to the fee funding kind of lagging because of where the development is at, which is kind of to be encouraged to be in the
It's working.
developed areas.
Yeah.
That's what we're hoping for. I don't know about the ag land since those can be more wildlife areas, but specifically with that being kind of the fees lagging there, you do want to encourage the infill, but is there you mentioned adjusting the fees to reflect some of those realities. Is that an area that'll be looked at or focused on, or is that to be determined?
That'll be looked at during the periodic fee review, is like which land cover types have been impacted and what we see moving forward. So it'll be looked at.
And that's currently happening right now, the 5-year review.
Other questions? Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tara.
Okay, so we just,
Yep, go ahead, sorry.
received and heard the Habitat Plan FY 17-18 annual report. We'll move on to item number 4 to review the draft FY 2020 and FY 21 2-year operating budget, and that's Ed.
So this is an opportunity for the PAC to comment on the budget, make any recommendations, because we'll be taking it to the implementation board in, 2 weeks, to seek, to recommend to them to pass it on to the governing board. It's kind of this step process. And then the governing board is the authorizing board for adopting our budget. So we've given you the raw numbers here. I'm here to answer any questions you may have in any of these areas. You may notice that administration is now down to 15% because we're allocating. It's not like my salary has disappeared, but we're allocating it to the appropriate program areas, which is Julie and some of you in the nonprofit world know that's a very common way that they do it in the nonprofit world. So it is reflecting where we're doing the work versus just all putting salaries in administrative. We've also created an additional category, which is the waters permitting. That's trying to integrate the 401 and 404 Clean Water Act permits into our process, and I'll explain a little bit more of that in the EO report. And on page 226, I'll bring to your attention the fiscal impact that kind of lays out where we see revenues and expenses. And if you have any questions about the numbers, and again, the EO report will inform some of this, because if all goes well, we will receive $8.2 million in grants this upcoming fiscal year.
Hopefully we can spend it on some actual land.
Exactly, because it's pretty meaningless if, some of it's for restoration, which is good, but the vast majority of it would be, and I'm being conservative on that number. If all goes well, it could be double that. So Tara mentioned that the cap has been removed from the Section 6 grant, and that was through the work of the California Coalition and the National HCP Coalition. So we applied for $10 million for this go-around. So if you have any questions, if you want to make any recommendations to us to make any changes, and you don't need to do that today. You can email me some stuff, and I have to get this staff report done and out to the board by next Thursday. But if you have anything here that you want to talk about, I'm here to answer your questions.
Yeah, no, go right ahead.
Go ahead, Jack.
Well, I had a couple of questions.
Yes.
Kind of high-level things. I mean, I know that, like, we have, like, this is on page 227.
227, gotcha.
It's kind of the high-level overview of the budget. There was section 5. There's reserve summary,
Okay.
and I guess when I looked at that, I thought I would see like a pool for acquisition dollars.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Where does something like that appear?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we have 12 million set aside for acquisitions. We have almost 15 million in this, what they call LAIF account. I forget what that stands for, but it's, as a government entity, we can invest in this state pool, where we get a better return on interest income. So currently, last time I looked, it was 2.55%. It's in bonds, so it's a very stable, safe investment. So that's where our rainy day fund is. But we can include that in the reserve summary. That's actually a good idea.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I think those are really important numbers, because that's where a lot of the money is.
Yeah.
But but I think, in the early days, I thought that caused us some problems too, because we actually tried to budget acquisition spending, and then it never kind of happened when we planned, and
I haven't done that.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't done that.
So I think
I don't know
five-
if Ken did that or not, but I never did that. Yeah.
So I think, but those are really kind of helps complete the financial picture.
Yeah, no, I
Standalone.
think that's a great
So-
idea. We'll create a category 5.5 or whatever,
That'd be-
and it'll be land acquisition reserve.
Yeah, I don't know if we have any other
No,
reserve.
no.
But that was just the one that popped out. The other question I had was, I could have figured this out if I would have had the spreadsheet with the formulas, but I couldn't quite understand the kind of overall view of this. Because I know you have this allocated number where I think what you do is try to take all the, well, maybe not all the administration, like section 1 or 1.0. Maybe all of that doesn't get allocated over the other three items, the permitting support, conservation strategy. Yeah, so I was curious about that. And then the other thing that just kind of bugged me about this is I noticed that, at the expense summary at the top, again, the very, very highest level, where there's just the four items. So technical and permitting support, 671, 928, that's all kind of broken down in detail under 2.0.
So you were asking about 2.0?
Yeah, 2.0, technical and permitting support, 671, 928.
Yeah.
And then, that's broken out into four items at the next level down too. And then, same thing for administration, 1.0. That $1.1 million, it's kind of broken out. But when I get to the conservation strategy implementation,
Yes.
that didn't match anymore. The 3.0 line of $5.5 million, when I looked at the broken out part, in the middle of the spreadsheet, that total was 6.2 million. So that didn't match where all the other categories did. From
So-
the summary line at the top to the breakout area
Gotcha.
below.
So you're seeing that is I'd have to look at this to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just looked at
Yeah.
that and it just kind of
Yeah.
I didn't understand what, all of a sudden I kind of lost the thread of what it was trying
Thread
to
of
tell me.
it. Okay.
Because it was, that particular area of conservation strategy
Yeah.
looked different from all the other categories.
Yeah, it doesn't add up in the totals, but it adds up on the bottom. So if you're looking at, so you're saying the basically 6.2 million is a combination, if I think I understand you, is of both fiscal years?
Well, yeah, because if I looked at that 6.2 million.
Yes.
On line, the subtotal.
Yes.
Under 3.8.
Yes.
I just expected to see that up at line, the third line, 3.0 at the top.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
Because it looked like that should just be carried up to
Yeah, so it's confusing on the way we're describing it.
Yeah, it didn't make any sense to me. I'm sure there's some.
Yeah, and in the, so what we present to the implementation board, we also present a budget booklet to them that hopefully won't. This is just how we're tracking it. But yeah, I understand why it's confusing. Yeah, okay. And again, I have till next Tuesday or Wednesday if you guys have any suggestions. This is our best guess of what we think we're going to be spending over the next couple of years.
So then again, on the allocated costs, the allocated costs over each of those main.
Those are both salaries and like rent. So we allocated a percentage of rent to the different categories.
Oh, so
Yes.
it includes like administration.
Like employee salaries
like the-
as
like the
well as
1.0
overhead.
at the top.
Yeah.
And some other.
Yeah.
Other.
Like we did a percentage of the budget that, based on the budget. So if we, think of it as a pie. If we spend 74% of our budget on conservation activities, 74% of the copier cost, 74% of the rent was
vehicles
assigned.
and
Yeah,
whatever, yeah.
right, correct. Yeah. Like vehicles, 100%, because we don't use it for administrative stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so then those allocated costs
Yeah.
aren't gonna add up to anything on this because they include non-labor.
Yeah, include non-labor, correct.
Other
Yeah.
expenses.
Yeah, it also includes legal services, because our attorney works on these different categories, yeah.
So then, is that true in general of your entire budget here? That, that each line item is a combination of labor and, non-labor items?
In the allocated cost
Only
section.
in the allocated
Yeah,
costs.
correct.
Everything else
Yeah,
is pure labor.
Yeah. The
Okay.
other thing is the cost actually, whether it's materials or construction costs or scientific contracting or, yeah.
Like when you talk to other, folks who are running, habitat plans, does like 15% administration, that's kind of in the ballpark of what?
I haven't asked them,
Yeah.
yeah, but I know, it's all the same money, it's just how you want to allocate it. I mean, we have 4.5 FTEs, so we can put it all in administrative, and like you correctly brought up, the optics didn't look good. But based on some of the, we've created a 501c3. So I went to a training put on by the Community Foundation, and it was interesting to hear how nonprofits do this. This is how they do it. Yeah. I haven't, and we have a CPA that we work with who is specialty is government accounting, and he's comfortable with how we're doing it, and he's advised us on all this. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Julie, you had a question?
Oh, just a basic question. You've like made me go off into a whole other world. But I'll keep
Pull
it
you back.
Yeah, I'll keep it simple. Yeah, I was just, so under, let's see, where was I now? Like, I think it was executive officer compensation, so 1.1. What was my question again? Where was I going with this? Oh, no, this was just a difference in the year, right? I mean, it's just what you're anticipating in terms of.
Exactly.
And was it because in the previous year you had a lot, I mean, what's the difference here? Because there's a fair amount of difference that we're looking at, so I was just curious, because you're over $100,000 in difference.
Oh, from which
From
lines?
FY19 to FY20.
It's the way we're categorizing it. We didn't categorize
yeah,
my
okay.
salary that way. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah. So we are splitting up my salary based on where I'm doing the work now.
Okay, so it's probably because when I went down into details, I was looking at it differently than that. All right, fine. All
Does
right.
that make sense now?
Yeah, it does. I thought that it was like there's,
And legal services, we didn't do that split either. So, and we're also, so if that is confusing. And we're also now categorizing potential litigation differently because we never spend that money. So we're just having it as a line item.
yeah, I understood that you were, basically going down the road of categorizing your salary. I was looking at it as, I must have got confused, but I was looking at it as compensation for other, not your base salary, but other costs
Yeah, that's,
with.
yeah, that's total. That's, I don't get benefits. I get pay in lieu of benefits, and then I have to go out and buy benefits. And that represents the total compensation.
Yeah, no, I see it here. Okay. All right. I'm good.
Any other? Okay. Rachel, do you have any questions on the proposed budget?
No questions.
Okay. Jake? Okay, and I have none. And so, Ed, we're okay, we've reviewed.
Yep.
And so we'll go on to item number 5, the executive officer's report.
Yes, thank you. So the first thing on here is the endowment investment. So to date, we've invested 1.319 million. So for the new people, a part of our fees includes a percentage of the fees that project proponents pay go towards an endowment. And the endowment builds up over time. In today's dollars, it's supposed to be around 100 million. And the point of the endowment is to manage the reserve system when the permit, the 50-year permit sunsets and the agency becomes something different than it is today, where we've accomplished all the conservation actions, but we still have to manage that landscape in perpetuity. So the endowment is designed to provide a funding source to oversee the reserve system, basically, and manage it. So we created a 501c3 for the purposes of giving us the ultimate flexibility and investing in the array of funds that the Silicon Valley Community Foundation has. And the balance as of May 1st is $1,390,000 and change. So from a advocacy update, we've been working with our Southern California colleagues, mainly in San Diego and Orange County, to expand the criteria of natural landscapes eligible for the greenhouse gas funds. And Senator Aiken and Senator Monning are key players. I've talked to Senator Monning's staff about this. And in addition, I asked the senator if he could support the following language being added to SB 45, and the sense I got was yes. And this is Allen's natural resource bond, which is, I think they're trying to get on the ballot next spring. I'm not sure what the timing is on it being on the ballot, but it's Wildfire Drought and Flood Protection Bond Act. And it was recently heard in the Senate Governance and Finance, and it passed out of committee with 5 yeas, including Senator Bell, and a couple noes. So this is, so those are the two things we're pushing with the California Coalition at the state level, is trying to get greenhouse gas funds spent on not just farmland and conifers, but also, and by farmland they mean cropland, but trying to expand not necessarily the pot, though we would like the pot expanded, but the categories of which landscapes would be eligible for the greenhouse gas funding. So that would include oak woodlands, scrublands, grassland, which is essentially rangeland, and to instead of just those categories of conifer forests and wetlands, as I spoke to earlier. From the Allen standpoint, we wanted language put into the Allen bill that kind of would give Wildlife Conservation Board a good chunk, $300 million of that bond, and specifically projects for protected of threatened and endangered species, including projects within natural communities conservation plans, which is what we are, or habitat conservation plans, we are that also, would allow us to be a little more competitive in being eligible for that money. So this goes to the question, I guess, Jan, that you were bringing out about, can we secure additional funding? So we do a lot of advocacy. There's 6 of us that pool money together to work with a lobbyist in Sacramento to help push these issues for us. And the California Coalition under John Hopkins also, John's very active in this and keeps us abreast on what's going on. From the federal level, I was on a trip in March, late March, and it was with the National HCP Coalition membership. We had representatives from Florida, Texas, and the Midwest, Defenders of Wildlife and the Nature Conservancy, and it was truly a bipartisan effort. The folks from Texas we were there with 2, Williamson County, one of the more conservative counties in Texas, were there in meetings with Defenders of Wildlife and me, pushing for singing from the same hymn book. It was a beautiful thing
It must have been.
to observe. And we met with Senator Rubio's staff. I did not meet with Senator Rubio. And he is, I saw a map of the Panther corridor on his wall. It starts from the Everglades on up to northern Florida. And he is supporting some of the things that our coalition has been pushing, but he wasn't aware of them. But now that we have Florida involved in the National Coalition, and they facilitated this meeting with Senator Rubio, he's going to push for some of the things that, including the availability of loans, which could be granted through something called TIFIA and WIFIA. One is with transportation, one is with water projects, that you could get money for advanced mitigation.
Yep.
To buy land. And so this national coalition is a new thing, and it's really starting to work. We had our conference, I think I told you already, in Pensacola this past year. It'll be back at the Department of Interior Training Center in West Virginia this year, but then it's going to be in Texas next year. And if any of you guys want to go, let me know. So.
Unless it's in Austin.
It is in Austin.
It is in Austin.
Oh, well, that's different.
A lot of the HCPs are in the Austin area. So these areas that are growing. So one thing is, our program is by meeting with the Senate and House committees, subcommittees, and funding committees. There's bipartisan support for what we do. It touches upon a lot of things. There is concern about sometimes are we working collaboratively with ranchers and stuff like that. There is sometimes concern about that. Sometimes the concern is the money being spent as it should be. But generally speaking, there's bipartisan support here. The administration is hostile. I don't know. I don't think necessarily the president has an opinion on this program, but there's somebody in the Department of Interior that just doesn't like federal money going towards land acquisition. And every year, it's zeroed out in the budget, and every year, Congress puts it back in. And it was Republican Congress putting it back in. Now it's a Republican Democrat Congress putting it back in. So it's always a struggle. We're told by both congressional staff and executive White House staff that us going to Washington every year has preserved funding for this program. And we were the ones that pushed for, hey, let's not have an artificial cap of $2 million. You used to award 10, 12, 6 million. So that has been removed. And that was a Republican Democrat initiative that got that changed. So there is bipartisanship in Washington. We don't always see it because we see the more high-profile fights between the two parties, but this is one program that is being supported by both. But there's the acting director of the Fish and Wildlife Service is a Ducks Unlimited former staff person. So I'm hopeful there that's something that is a good thing. Ducks Unlimited has a great track record of working with farmers and rice farmers in particular, and in this state, and with conservation groups. So I think they do see the value in these kind of programs. Permit integration, the water board is kind of going to be the challenge. We thought we had a path forward with them with the waste discharge requirements. I'm not so sure, but the recent changes to the definition of what a wetland is and some of the rules with the changes at the state board, they've identified NCCPs as a watershed plan, which is a major thing to happen. Given that the state board is recognizing that NCCPs are a watershed plan, we can hopefully use that change in state law and the way state Port of Cologne is being administered to get the two regional water quality boards, in particular the San Francisco Regional Water Quality Board, to work more collaboratively with us on both implementation of development projects, implementation of restoration projects, and working together and with conserving our landscape and improving water quality. We're in the home stretch, in my opinion, to integrating Steelhead Section 7 consultation with our ESA and CISA permitting process and our 404 process. It can't help the water district in their big projects, but it'll help landowners and public projects that are within the thresholds established by RGP 18, and it will lead to us focusing on Steelhead when our in-stream fees will go up for projects affecting Steelhead, and that delta will then, those monies will be used towards steelhead conservation and recovery. And there are steelhead in Pacheco Creek, by the way. Chris was correct, there hasn't been a comprehensive survey of steelhead in that creek, but they've been seen by Joel Casagrande of NOAA Fisheries, as well as Jerry Smith, but I think a lot of you know Jerry is the preeminent fish expert in this area. So they are there. We're making great progress on our in-lieu fee program through the 404. And basically, with our habitat plan, we have an in-lieu fee program. We collect fees, and then we go out and try to buy land. We don't have to buy land in advance of the fees coming in. So currently, we have to do restoration projects in advance 404 permit coverage for our project proponents. That's a big reason why we did the San Felipe project. But once we get this in lieu fee program set up with the Corps, we can collect fees, build up a pot of money, and then do a project. So it'll make things easy, get us off the hamster wheel. We're already on a hamster wheel with the habitat plan. We don't need another one. So grant updates. You can see we're applying for a lot of them. I'll bring to your attention the 10 million that we're applying through Section 6. I also bring to attention to the last one on page 2, the $495,000. We're going to implement wildlife connectivity actions in the Pacheco Pass area on the property we own, and including a critter boardwalk through culverts during when there's water. The critters will be able to use. Yeah, as well as improving improving things underneath Pacheco Creek Bridge that's near our property to allow for year-round passage underneath the bridge, and working on a pilot project with Caltrans for directional fencing to try to, and those are things we applied for. The other thing I'll bring to your attention is the Monarch butterfly grants that are now available. We are going to be doing monarch butterfly, focusing, even though it's not one of our covered species,
It's dangerously low.
It's dangerously low.
Yeah.
We are going to be focusing on putting in milkweed on all our restoration sites and the nectar plants for the monarch at all our grassland restoration sites. And we're also encouraging OSA and others to do the same thing.
Do the same thing, great.
Yep.
Great.
And we're
Yeah.
hoping to do some of this stuff out at Coyote Valley where we want to do the owl stuff. Why not do some stuff for monarchs too? And we're going to be applying for more stream and riparian projects that are funding through Prop 68. So everyone who voted for Prop 68, thank you. It's helping to fund the work we do. Land acquisitions, I gave you a little update on Clara. UTC Shingle Valley, that's what we call it. Shingle Valley, we're not going to be acquiring those parts of that property, though they will remain in the hands of UTC for a long time. But another 1,500 acres. Doug brought to my attention that he saw a posting on the Department of Toxic Substances webpage stating that UTC, that they were putting up for public comment the fact that they were going to transfer ownership to us of 1,500 acres of their property, which is good news.
Yeah, no, that's a good sign.
Because they didn't tell me that. You know, we're all laughing internally. It's like, wow,
They're
I didn't
just
know that.
messing
So
with you.
thanks to Doug, he found that. And,
You're a member of the
Yeah.
public, right?
yeah, I
That's
just
your
said,
notification.
Oh, great, yeah. Our appraisal's being reviewed by the Department of General Services for approval, and UTC is, it's on the way to happening. We're also in negotiations with other landowners. We aren't necessarily the leads on some of these. OSA and Post are. We're the leads on, I think, three of them. One is kind of dormant, but Post and OSA are the leads on 3 others. So that we could potentially provide funding to. One of them I can say is very, very important for mitigation at Anderson Dam, and I'll leave it at that. Big news, Tara's been doing a lot of great work with PG&E, and I have to say, they have been a great partner working with on improving the road infrastructure up on Coyote Ridge. With their bankruptcy, we weren't sure that they would be completing it, but we heard recently from the gas pipeline unit that they will be in 2020 starting to do improvements to the Upper Ridge Road, which is where the main trail of the park will be. And I'm glad somebody mentioned burrowing owls. So the wildlife agencies approved the burrowing owl captive rearing program. So because we're in DEFCON 5, we're going, and 70% of the chicks die in the wild. We're going to be taking some of those chicks that would have died and raising them in captivity with the Peninsula Humane Society and then releasing them in the wild. The first site will be Shoreline, where there's in Mountain View, which is it's not in the plan area, but it's in the extended burrowing owl conservation area. And there are breeding birds there, not a lot, but there's a lot of habitat there. And the birds will be raised in captivity, I think, for about, so this spring, the birds are starting to pair up. They'll start doing their thing and having little chicks. So early to late summer, those chicks will be banded, and a percentage of them will be taken from their parents and raised in captivity. We're also doing a supplemental feeding program of the existing adults, so to give them more protein in their diet. Also, when the chicks are born, we're continuing the supplemental feeding program, so that means they don't have to fly. We're feeding them mice, bringing them right at their doorstep. It's like DoorDash or one of these Thistle. Tara gets stuff from Thistle, so it's like bringing the food right to you. And so it's ensuring that they don't have to fly as far. It's higher protein instead of them eating little earwicks and grasshoppers. So between those two things, we're hoping we can recover the population before it blinks out. We've learned from our Canadian friends that when a population blinks out like it did in British Columbia, it's really hard to recover it, and they're still working at it. So it's an endangered species in Canada. So we're doing what we can, and then the second wave of chicks in the following year will be released at Coyote Valley site, and they will be putting it in what we call these hacking aviaries. They will remain in those hacking, so they'll be in the Humane Society for, let's say, 8 months, 6 to 8 months, being fed very well, treated like kings and queens. Then the sex will be determined, and then a male and female will be released into these hacking aviaries. They will remain within a month in the hacking areas over an artificial burrow complex. We're hoping those two will pair up, go in there, make little burrowing owls, and grow the population. So we'll be doing that at both these sites. And so working with the City of Mountain View on the one and the OSA on the other. And the Humane Society is an amazing organization. They haven't asked for a penny from us for any of this. So the Wildlife Agency's finally approved that. By finally, I mean the state had some concerns.
Yeah.
The feds, it was pretty easy for them to do it. We also are getting a new board member, Abigail Ramsden of the Nature Conservancy. We're going to be recommending to the implementation board that you replace Craig Edgerton, who retired from our board in January, along with Dick.
We stole him.
Yeah, pardon me?
We stole him.
Oh, you stole Dick?
No, we stole Craig.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
He's on our board now. And now I can actually step down from this one because with Abby, you don't need me around. That's a real coup. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, we still like you being here, so.
I'll just let Abby talk now.
So that's all I have to report. Thank you.
And just one thing to add is that you mentioned Bill Monning several times.
Yeah.
And that he is termed out. And
I know.
John Laird is one of the higher profile candidates. He definitely, I believe anyway, wears an environmental hat.
That's my understanding. I know he was, when I worked in Placer, we were aware of his good work with creating the Sierra Conservancy.
Well, he was under Governor Brown.
Right, Governor Brown is Department of Natural Resources, right?
Yeah. Kind of headed that sucker up, so.
Yeah, yeah, no, we'd have a friend, I assume, with him.
Yeah.
And Bell is termed out too, right?
Yeah, and we shall see, it's very early, so, I mean, Supervisor Cortez's polling he's right now, he's probably the biggest name, so.
I saw his email, somehow I'm on his email list, so I
Right.
saw that.
It's an impressive list.
Yeah, it is.
But it's a matter of, see who comes out in the ending vote. He definitely stands out in terms of his name. But Johnny Camus is not that far behind.
Okay.
I mean, well, in San Jose, he'd be known, and that's your bulk. Well, I guess for Bell's district, it's probably the bulk of the voters,
It's
actually.
a lot of San Jose, yes.
Yeah. So, but there's a couple of other one or two other interesting names in that race.
Okay, do any members have anything that they would like to have on the next or future agendas?
The pathways for wildlife.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we were gonna have them this month, but we figured with Terra and the water district that,
Great, we didn't need them.
yeah, it would have been too much.
Okay, then, anything else? And otherwise, we'll adjourn at 8:04. And thank you all, and we'll see you. What's the next date?
I think it's August